Okay, my concern about 5G is that the RF radiation from 5G is dangerous. It penetrates it disrupts the blood-brain barrier. It also is associated with glioblastomas and other cancers. And it causes a lot of other dramatic health effects. And there are literally thousands and thousands of studies in that. I've litigated on that issue, and I've won in the Federal Court of Appeals. So, you can say it's a conspiracy theory, but the Federal Court of Appeals, I also won a case on Monsanto and glyphosate that it caused non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that was called a conspiracy theory. What I've said about 5G is, it is dangerous. It is underregulated. Other countries regulate it much better than us. And we need to protect our children. We should not be having these antennas on elementary schools. We should be warning people appropriately, do not put that cell phone next to your head. Because, we're seeing this epidemic now of glioblastomas, and almost all of them are connected to the year that you favor the cell phone with. There's study after study that shows that, and I'm in litigation on that issue right now. And, if we get a fair trial, we're going to win that litigation as well.
But again,
This is what most Americans innocently put into their bodies these days, and most alarmingly, into the bodies of their children. And it's no coincidence that Americans die earlier than Canadians or Germans or Italians or Japanese or Koreans or Australians or most any other comparable country. And it wasn't always that way. Until the early 1990s, our life expectancy was the same or better than other developed countries. Then suddenly, more and more Americans began suffering from chronic diseases, from obesity, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and all kinds of autoimmune diseases. Our maternal mortality rate soared to the highest of any developed country on earth. Same with infant mortality. Like the frog in the slowly boiling water, we didn't really notice as we got sicker and sicker. We've grown now to accept chronic disease conditions as normal. But now, in 2024, we're finally waking up to this cataclysm, and we're asking ourselves, how in the world did this happen? Well, a big part of it is our diet. Restaurants that serve contaminated food are fined or shut down. But when it's the government that approves the poisons in our food, a few people get very, very rich, and the toxins end up in every supermarket aisle. Let me show you what I mean. Doritos, Cheez-Its, Cap'n Crunch, gummy bears. Everyone knows that these are junk foods, so maybe you wouldn't be too surprised to see that the ingredients include a lot of poisons, including a harmful yellow dye called tetrazine, or yellow dye number 5. What you may not know is that this dye was originally made out of the sludge that's left over when you turn coal into coke for blast furnaces. It's called coal tar, and I've actually sued many big industries for legacy contamination of coal tar all around the country because it's so toxic and it's so harmful to the environment and human beings. A century ago, it was just an obnoxious industrial byproduct that everybody was trying to figure out ways to get rid of. One of the ways that they did that was by paving roads. But then a British chemist figured out that the coal tar could be used to derive fabric dye. And if fabric dye, why not food? Food manufacturers began using it to cover up the discoloration of low-quality foods that they wanted to pass off on unsuspecting customers. They didn't know back then that this yellow dye, tartrazine, causes tumors, asthma, developmental delays, neurological damage, ADD, ADHD, hormone disruption, gene damage, anxiety, depression, intestinal injuries. Well, we know it now. We've known this for decades. That's why tartrazine is heavily restricted in other countries. In some countries, foods with tartrazine have a warning label that it may cause ADHD in children. Today, it's made from petroleum, not coal tar. Either way, it's crazy to add this to your kids' favorite foods. It doesn't even change the flavor. This yellow dye isn't just in junk food. It's in the foods that we consider healthy. It's in everyday kids' snacks like popcorn, mac and cheese, fruit snacks. It's in sports drinks like Gatorade and so-called vitamin water. It's even added to chicken broth, to corn, to pickles, to mustard, and to yogurt. And so, of course, our kids get sick. And we lovingly feed them chewable vitamins, which have, surprise, tartrazine. And so the cycle continues until the coughs and asthma kick in, at which point you go to pick up some cough syrup. And yeah, you guessed it, tartrazine. I've been picking on tartrazine today, but that's just one of at least 100 chemical poisons that our health agencies allow into our children's food. I can make a video just like this to talk about Red 40, BHA, BHT, potassium bromate, chemical after chemical, and on and on and on. If just one of them can cause all of these problems, imagine what they're doing in combination. That has never been studied. If we took all of these chemicals out, our nation would get healthier immediately. We'd have fewer sick days. We'd have better focus. We'd have less anxiety. Our kids would learn more easily. We'd lose weight. We'd have more energy. We'd have fewer tumors and longer lives. It's not all dark. Over the past 16 years, the government has banned 8 chemical additives that cause cancer, genetic damage, asthma, and many of the other self-conditions as tartrazine does. And you know what's interesting? All 8 of those crucial steps forward in our kids' health were taken under President Trump. But the Democrats who claim to be all about healthcare have stood by watching other countries ban these poisons and make our kids sick, asthmatic, hyperactive, and depressed. They left them on every supermarket shelf in America. They even used your tax money to put them in your kids' school lunch. So their big food and their big ag donors probably gave them all that golden handshake and the big money hug. And their big pharma donors probably called them up and thanked them also, because now they're going to make billions selling Adderall, Prozac, and rescue inhalers. Enough is enough. President Trump and I are going to stop the mass poisoning of American children. Together, we're going to make America healthy again.
Why should people be worried about these kind of products?
Seed oils are one of the most unhealthy ingredients that we have in foods. And seed oils, the reason they're in the foods is because they're heavily subsidized. They're very, very cheap, but they are associated with all kinds of very, very serious illnesses, including body-wide inflammation.
Right.
Which affects all of our health. It's one of the worst things you can eat, and it's almost impossible to avoid. If you eat any processed food, you're going to be eating seed oil.
Right, and it's interesting, the government subsidizes it. Why would the government want to subsidize something that's going to make people sick, and then in the end, we all end up paying for that in terms of healthcare costs, which are skyrocketing?
Yeah, because that is a direct result of corruption. About 75% of FDA's budget comes from regulated industry, and that means food processors and pharmaceutical industry. All of them profit from a sick population.
You know, a big item that, and by the way, it's getting very expensive, are cereals. Why is the food coloring in particular bad?
Food coloring, you see your yellow food coloring, that is a petroleum product. Mm-hmm. It's associated with really, with depression. It's associated with autoimmune injuries and ADHD.
Yeah.
These, and red dye also is very bad. In Europe, these same companies are producing the same products, but they're using natural coloring. But here they can get away with it. We have about almost 1,000 chemicals that are in our food that are either outright banned in Europe or actively discouraged. So you wouldn't be able to buy this kind of stuff in Europe. You ask about why it's so cheap, why it's so ubiquitous. It's because we subsidize the worst foods. We subsidize it with about 70% of our food stamp program is to processed foods, which are all poison.
Right. One of the things that's interesting is you'll see on labels natural flavors, which is this catch-all phrase that I guess was lobbied for, but the ingredients in natural flavors are not really natural.
No. In our country, natural flavors are chemical products. So you can't trust what's on the ingredient label, and the reason for that, again, is government corruption. It's that the agency, the USDA, the FDA, have been captured by the industries they're supposed to regulate. And they all have an interest in subsidies and then in mass poisoning the American public.